citizenship to be a commitment you've made to improve your country, your community, your schools. Take pride in being a U.S. citizen. Realize you have responsibilities along with your rights and privileges here. Speak up about your views. Contribute time and energy in making your communities and schools the best they can be.
Good evening and welcome once again to the Citizenship Chronicles. This is your host, Stephen M. Nelson, reminding you to get up, get out, and get involved, which is what we did in Los Angeles with the ACORN convention this year, back in June. Tonight we're going to continue with highlights from the convention. In fact, we'll pick up right where we left off last year. Pat Boone, seen here from New York, had just finished introducing the topic of education, and we're going to move right along with the next guest to speak on education. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Now, Jean from Albuquerque, we're going to introduce Lily.
My name is Jean Ingram. Thank you, Bonnie. I'm proud to introduce Lily Estelson. She's the National Secretary-Treasurer for the National Education Association. Ms. Estelson brings her work more than 20 years experience in the classroom, and she's traveled throughout the country as a dynamic advocate for children and public educators like myself. The NEA and their 2.7 million members have become a major part of ACORN's National Education Campaign. Invest in schools, invest in our kids. Our shared commitment to full funding for public education programs has created a strong partnership that we look forward to expanding. And on behalf of, as a teacher as myself, she's here to support our push to get President Bush to give us our money that he promised and no child left behind. You hear me, ACORN? Let's give it up for Ms. Estelson.
Buenos dias. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here to suggest that I may very well be the only 6th grade Utah teacher who's ever been interviewed on Lou Dobbs' Moneyline on CNN. He was there to discuss the most ironically, maybe tragically named law on the books, No Child Left Behind. I have such a hard time even saying that name. I have a friend that said, well, since we have to test their butts off, we ought to call it No Child's Behind Left, which I have no doubt. Now, he wanted to talk about money. He wanted to talk about how much the NEA and America's teachers would accept as adequate funding for the new law. He wanted to know whether or not we wanted $8 billion or $9 billion or $100 billion to make us happy. And my answer was very simple. All the money in the world will not fix a law that requires perfect children with perfect test scores by the magical year 2014 and thereafter. You are absolutely key in having the public begin to understand these absurdities. Now, the administration underfunded the things that worked, like class size and after-school programs and technology and training. And instead, they replaced that with mind-boggling bureaucratic nightmares of complex formulas to measure adequate yearly progress. This law was so sloppily written that it accidentally requires some of our special ed teachers to have 3 or 4 or 5 bachelor's degrees for teaching special ed children 3 or 4 or 5 subjects. And in other cases, a lot of our teachers' aides, who often make minimum wage, are being told that they have to go to college and get an associate degree or lose their jobs. But let's just cut to the most absurd of the absurdities of this new federal law, mandated, signed in a rose garden, and sealed with a kiss by the Department of Education. It actually says that 10 years from today, every child will pass a multiple choice test in reading and math. Every child, every autistic child, every child with Down syndrome, gifted and talented kids, kids who love to goof off and play with the pencils, kids who don't speak English, kids who vacation in Europe, kids who move with the harvest and don't know what a vacation is. Bureaucrats will set the score. If one child misses that target score by 1 point, the entire school is labeled as a failure at our new federal Stepford Child public schools. At the end of the interview, even Lou Dobbs was on our side. The more people find out about this law, the more you tell them what this absurd law says, the more people are on the side of common sense. Now, this law passed with great bipartisan support. Now that it's been in place for 2 years, it has a great bipartisan opposition. Joining the National Education Association in calling for fixing and funding No Child Left is the radically left-wing liberal Utah State Legislature. Utah Republicans and NEA holding hands, swaying back and forth and singing Kumbaya has only happened once before in a parallel universe on a Star Trek episode. But it's happening now. Community activists, parents, teachers, administrators, support staff, basically each and every carbon-based life form. This is not going to work, son. Okay. Outside of the current administration is crying out in one magnificent shout to the heavens, what were you people thinking? Fix this. And I have to tell you, a lot of our friends of education, voted for this law mostly because they were promised buckets full of money for schools in need, buckets of money that never, by the way, actually appeared. We were shocked, simply shocked. But even our friends have a hard time understanding NEA's feelings about the use and the abuse of these high-stakes tests. I mean, to them it's like the hokey pokey. I mean, schools, tests, that's what it's all about. And they really can't see what the big deal is. But I can.
All right.
Because I worked for years in homeless shelters, a public school located in the Salt Lake City homeless shelter. And I know exactly what the label of failure will mean to disadvantaged, struggling children, particularly when that failure label is not a fair, true assessment of their achievement, but a narrow definition of knowledge that was chosen specifically because it would fit on a multiple choice test given in English only and normed to the common knowledge base of suburban middle-class children. I know exactly which children will be left behind. I can tell you their names.
All right.
One of them is named Julio. Julio was my oldest child at the shelter that year, many years ago. He was 8 years old. He is the angriest human being I had ever met. He hated living in the shelter. He hated the teachers. He hated the 5-, 6-, and 7-year-olds in class because it was an insult to be with all the babies. Most of the time he would just sit there with his little spring-loaded fists waiting to smack someone who got a little too far into his space. And his family was told if he gave kids one more bloody nose, he was going to be asked to leave. And we didn't want that to happen to him. So we worked so hard to get him to learn a little self-discipline, learn to behave himself, and absolutely nothing was working. Until the day I made him the teacher. I made him the teacher because my mother is from Panama. Okay, I'll explain. She did not teach us Spanish, and she regrets that, so now she makes up for it by nagging us to take Spanish classes at the community night school. And I signed up because I love my mother, and I'm scared of her. But I'm really bad at doing my homework. I blame the teacher for not motivating me.
All right.
And Julio was on the playground one day while I was frantically trying to conjugate my verbs, and I heard him yell something in Spanish to one of the other kids. And I got the best idea in my teaching career. I said, Julio, aquí, te necesito, ayúdame. which I really hope means come over here, I need you to help me. And he came over and he said, what? And I said, my mom's gonna kill me if I don't pass this test. You gotta help me with it. And so he sat down and he corrected my paper and he corrected my pronunciation and he kept saying helpful, encouraging things like, estúpido maestra loca. He said it means good job. And the other kids started coming over and listening to what he had to say. They said, Julio, how do you say this? Julio, how do you say that? And he started to teach them as he was teaching me. And so I started calling him maestro, teacher. I said, maestro, get the kids lined up for lunch. I got them lined up for lunch. I said, maestro, I got to get the kids on the computer over here. You take the kindergartners and read to them. And he would read to the kindergartners. By the end of the week, he didn't even ask me what I wanted. He'd just come in and say, okay, I'm here. I said, great, maestro. Take the color flashcards and work with Chester. And he'd walk away and say, gosh, you can't do nothing without me. And then he'd do the color flashcards with Chester. And at the end of the month, I said, you know, you are a really good teacher. You need to go to college. You need to come back here and be a teacher with me. And he just laughed and he said, I ain't gonna be no teacher. He said, when I go to college, I'm gonna be a wrestler with the World Wrestling Federation. When I go to college. You tell me that is not adequate yearly progress. The National Education Association is working night and day with you, with parents, with administrators, with Republican governors to fix and fund this insane law, where Julio can be appreciated beyond his test score. We are so proud to have signed a formal partnership with ACORN so that the strength of your amazing voices will be added to 2.7 million teachers representing the NEA.